Here's what's going viral right now. The confetti is gone. The bill just arrived, and somebody has to pay it. July 19th, MetLife Stadium. Spain lifted the trophy after a 1-0 win in extra time. The tournament ended. The accounting did not. American television delivered over 62 million viewers, the most watched soccer broadcast in United States history. 90 minutes later, 11 host cities went back to their spreadsheets. 3 days on, this is the story nobody televises. What a World Cup actually leaves behind once the cameras leave. FIFA projects $13 billion in revenue for this cycle. An all-time record, collected, banked, and gone. American host cities projected a collective shortfall of roughly $250 million. That number is now coming due. And a federal agency Americans know from disasters had already moved $625 million into tournament security. So, 3 questions. What did the tickets actually deliver? What do the cities actually owe? And was any of it worth it? Same rules as always. Everything stamped verified carries a source and a date. Everything else is labeled analysis. Nothing in between. In our last film, we asked who pays for the World Cup. The invoices are real now. This is what it left behind. Start with the honest part. On the field and on screen, this tournament was not a failure. It was a hit. First round of Guess the Number. What did the champion federation take home in prize and preparation money? Lock it in. $50 million in prize money. With preparation payments included, the winning federation clears more than $63.5 million. That check now belongs to Spain, the largest champion payout in the history of the tournament. It goes to the federation, not the players. And losing still paid. Every one of the 48 qualified teams banked at least $12.5 million. Total prize and preparation pool, $871 million. Qatar 2022 paid $440 million. The pool nearly doubled. Clubs got paid too. The Club Benefits Program distributes $355 million to the clubs that released players. Roughly $11,000 per player, per day, paid to the club, for every single day of the tournament. Added up, prize money, preparation, club benefits. Call it $1.23 billion flowing back into football. Against $8.9 billion coming in. Roughly 14 cents of every tournament dollar leaves the building. Remember that number. Now the audience. Fox posted record American ratings for the opening match, and knockout viewership kept climbing through late June. Then came the final. 39 million on Fox, peaking near 52 million, plus 24 million in Spanish. Whatever fans thought of the prices they watched. Globally, FIFA has not published the final audience yet. For scale, the 2022 final drew 1.42 billion. Inside the stadiums, total attendance reached 6.81 million across 104 matches in 16 host cities, nearly double the old record. Now remember who bought those eyeballs. Fox paid $480 million for these rights back in 2015, with no competitive bidding. Telemundo paid $465 million the same way. 11 years later, those look like the best sports deals in America. So mark the first rows of the ledger clearly. Broadcasters won. Sponsors won. Teams and clubs took the biggest payday in history. That is the part of this story that worked. Now walk with me from the broadcast truck to the box office. Because the money FIFA expected from fans was enormous. Ticketing and hospitality were projected at up to $3 billion this cycle. But cameras kept finding the same thing in the most expensive sections. FIFA says its count reflects scanned tickets and fans inside, not a visual read of the seats. Empty seats at a record-breaking World Cup are not a scandal by themselves. They are a symptom of what exactly? Of a pricing experiment FIFA quietly reversed in June, and that 2 state attorneys general are still asking questions about. To understand what the tickets left behind, go back to a promise made in a document filed in 2018. The North American bid book projected a ceiling, the most expensive seat at the final, about $1,550. The delivered ceiling was $10,990, roughly 7 times the promise under a system called dynamic pricing. The floor was not gentle either. The cheapest verified seat at that final listed at $5,785. And hospitality packages for the same match ran as high as $73,200 for one football match. Then, in June, FIFA did what organizers almost never do at peak demand: cut prices on all 104 matches. At the same time, it released roughly 70% of the hotel room blocks it had been holding across the host cities. Nobody discounts everything at once while demand is breaking records. Analysts read it as an algorithm that had overreached. Now, days after the final, we can finally ask the question that matters. Did the discount work? Did the seats sell? Read it honestly. Attendance measures bodies. Revenue measures dollars. A packed stadium sold cheaply is not a financial win. And a stadium with visible gaps in its premium tiers tells you exactly where the pricing model broke. At the top. That is the signature of dynamic pricing failure. The cheap seats clear. The premium inventory, the highest margin product, just sits there. Which is exactly what a 70% hotel block return implies. The premium demand FIFA modeled at the prices FIFA set did not fully arrive. Remember the target. Ticketing and hospitality were projected to triple, from roughly $950 million last cycle to $3 billion. Triple. That projection assumed the algorithm would find a buyer at every price it invented. In June, FIFA blinked first. The resale market told its own story. Secondary platforms are the honest thermometer of what fans will genuinely pay. In the final week, resale for the biggest match collapsed, 12,200 down to about 7,000, 28% in a week. That direction is the whole tell. If resale collapsed below face value, the primary market was priced above what the market would actually bear. Simple as that. If resale surged, FIFA left money on the table, and the scalpers it said it was fighting captured the difference anyway. Either way, one number settles it. Did ticketing and hospitality hit $3 billion? FIFA has not published it. $3.1 billion was the target, not a result. FIFA does not publish tournament ticket revenue on demand. Audited figures land in annual reports, months after the confetti is swept up. So hold that thread. It becomes the single most important unknown in this entire aftermath, and we will come back to it. Because whatever the tickets earned, the questions attached to them did not end when the trophy was lifted. New York and New Jersey opened formal inquiries into FIFA's ticketing practices. As of this week, still open and still no findings or charges. Be precise about what that means. An inquiry is a request for documents and testimony. It is not a finding of wrongdoing. FIFA says its pricing was lawful and demand-driven. Meanwhile, 11 American cities were opening envelopes of their own. Those we can read. Welcome back. This is the chapter the highlight reels skip. What a host city actually holds in its hands the morning after. Under FIFA's host agreements, FIFA controls essentially all tournament revenue, tickets, sponsorship, broadcast, while cities cover their own staging costs. Of every dollar spent on World Cup tickets inside an American host city, the amount that stayed local was zero. Across the host cities, the projected collective shortfall runs to roughly $250 million, projected before the real invoices arrived. 11 American metros carried this: Atlanta, Boston, Dallas, Houston, Kansas City, Los Angeles, Miami, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Seattle. Each wrote the same categories of check: police overtime, transit surges, barriers, emergency staging, street closures, sanitation, fan festivals. Take Foxborough, Massachusetts, a town of under 20,000 people. This projected security tab alone, $7.8 million. For a town that size, $7.8 million is not a rounding error. It is a meaningful share of an annual budget. Now multiply versions of that across 10 more metros, bigger stadiums, longer schedules, more matches, more nights of overtime. And these are not costs a city can decline. Security around a global event is a legal and practical obligation, priced by risk. So what did the cities get in return? The event itself, crowds, exposure, hotel taxes, and a stack of economic impact studies. Round 2 of Guess the Number. Of every dollar of World Cup ticket revenue, How many cents stayed inside the host city? 0. Not 1 cent. Ticket revenue is FIFA revenue, top to bottom, in every one of the 16 host cities. FIFA's control ran into the smallest details. Corporate stadium names were temporarily scrubbed, replaced for the tournament by FIFA's own neutral labels. Read that as a metaphor and it works perfectly. For 1 month, the host city took its own name off its own building. Now the invoices start arriving. Police file overtime. Transit files surge costs. Contractors submit their totals. The first post-tournament figures are landing now. The city invoices are not public yet, only projections. Collective shortfalls of up to 250 million. Expect these numbers to arrive slowly and in pieces. Municipal accounting is not built for speed. It is built for audits. Which means the honest state of the story right now is incomplete. Any channel giving you a final number today is guessing. But we can say what the structure guarantees. The revenue left. The cost stayed. That was decided years before kickoff. And there is a second bill most coverage misses entirely. Opportunity cost. What those officers, those buses, and those budgets were not doing. A month of exceptional deployment is a month of ordinary services running thin. That never shows up on any invoice. Some cities pushed back before the final whistle. Miami warned it needed about $70 million while the federal money still had not arrived. The countercase deserves airtime. Cities bid for this. They lobbied. They campaigned. They signed the host agreements voluntarily. Nobody forced a city to host a World Cup. The terms were public. The costs were foreseeable. That is a fair and serious point. The rebuttal is equally fair. Cities compete against each other for these events, and competition drives concessions in exactly one direction. And when the municipal bill got too heavy, the cities did what American cities do. They asked Washington. Washington said yes. Congress set aside $846 million in federal security support for this tournament. Taxpayer money, appropriated before a single match. On March 18th, FEMA moved the first tranche, $625 million, distributed across the host jurisdictions. That is the same agency Americans associate with hurricanes, floods, and wildfires, running the security grant program for a soccer tournament. This is not by itself a scandal. Governments routinely secure major events. Olympics, Super Bowls, conventions, all of them get federal support. But follow the dollar and the shape matters. Public money secured a private tournament whose revenue was privatized in full. $625 million is not a line item. It is roughly 2.5 times the entire projected city shortfall. Which raises an uncomfortable possibility. The federal grant may be the only reason the host city math looked survivable at all. What did that money buy? Screening equipment, command centers, interagency coordination, overtime for officers who were never on FIFA's payroll. It did not buy tickets, revenue share, or equity. Federal support is a cost line. There is no return column. $846 million appropriated. $625 million released in March. That leaves roughly $221 million outstanding. Where that remainder goes and whether it covers the invoices arriving now is one of the live questions of this aftermath. Because federal grants reimburse eligible costs. Eligible is doing enormous work in that sentence. Not every municipal bill qualifies. As of this week, the status of the remaining federal money is still unpublished. FEMA has not said how much of the $625 million was drawn. So stack the public ledger. City shortfalls projected at $250 million. Federal support, $846 million appropriated. Add state police deployments, transit overtime, and the opportunity costs nobody invoices. The public contribution runs well past $1 billion. That is analysis, not a receipt. But it is arithmetic built entirely from verified public numbers, and it is not close. Now hold that against the other side of the map. Because while the cities counted costs, somebody was counting revenue. $13 billion across the cycle. $8.9 billion from this tournament alone. Collected centrally, banked in Zurich. So after the break, who actually won this World Cup? Not on the field, on the ledger, the final scoreboard. Welcome back. Time to build the only scoreboard that outlives a tournament. The one with money on it. Row 1. FIFA. $13 billion projected across the cycle, the largest revenue haul in the organization's history. 8.9 billion of that came from one summer. 3 countries, 104 matches, nearly 70% of the entire cycle. Broadcast grew from 3.1 to 4.3 billion. Sponsorship, roughly 3.8 billion. Both locked in before kickoff. Notice what those two pipes have in common. Neither depended on ticket sales. Neither depended on a full stadium. Neither carried risk. Only the third pipe, the fans, was exposed to demand. And the fans were the only group who could actually say no. Row 2. Host nations. Total staging costs $3.76 billion, and not one new stadium was required. That is the genuinely good news, and it deserves emphasis. America did not build white elephants. It rented buildings that already existed. Recent hosts spent years and billions on venues that now sit half-used. The 2026 model avoided the single worst mega-event mistake. Row 3. Teams and clubs. $1.23 billion in prize, preparation, and club benefits. The best-paid World Cup ever staged. Row 4. Host cities. Roughly $250 million in projected shortfalls, with real invoices still arriving this week. Row 5. Taxpayers. $846 million appropriated, $625 million already disbursed, whether or not they watched a match. Row 6. Fans. The most expensive World Cup tickets ever sold, under a pricing system now under investigation by 2 state attorneys general. Final round of guess the number. Of every dollar this tournament collected, how many cents flowed back out to teams and clubs? 14 cents. 1.23 billion out against 8.9 billion in. The rest funds operations, reserves, and development programs. FIFA's defenders make a fair point. It is a non-profit federation, and surpluses are redistributed into global football over time. Critics answer that the redistribution is opaque, and that the entities which carried 2020 SIXS costs American cities are not on the list. Both can be true. What is not in dispute is the direction of flow during the tournament itself. Inward, upward, and out of the country. So here is the scoreboard. Finished. FIFA won. Broadcasters won. Sponsors won. Teams and clubs won. Cities and taxpayers carried it. Which leaves the only question that matters to anyone who actually lives in a host city. Was it worth it? This chapter is analysis. Every word of it. The verified numbers are behind us. What follows is interpretation, and it is labeled as such. Worth it is not one question. It is 3. Did visitors bring new money? Did the city keep it? And what did getting it cost? Economists have studied that latter for decades, and they keep finding the same 3 leaks. Substitution, crowding out, leakage. Substitution. A local family spends on the World Cup instead of the cinema. Money moves across town. The city total barely changes. Crowding out. Tournament visitors displace the tourists and conventions that would have come anyway, scared off by prices and chaos. Leakage. Much of what fans spend flows straight out of town, to FIFA, to international chains, to outside contractors. In June, economists at North Carolina State published analysis warning that World Cup impact projections were overstated. They were not alone. Now the host committees are publishing their own numbers. Seattle projects $929 million in impact. That is a projection, not an audit. Read those claims carefully. Gross visitor spending is not net local gain. Studies commissioned by the beneficiaries rarely find bad news. Here is the countercase honestly stated. This edition was cheap to stage, historically watched, and required no new construction at all. So 2026 could genuinely beat the dismal historical average, precisely because America did not spend billions building anything new. But notice what even the optimistic case concedes. The upside came from what was not spent, not from FIFA sharing what it collected. That is the verdict, city by city. For a host, the best available outcome is to lose less, not to win. Privatized gains, socialized costs. Economists have used that phrase for decades. 2026 did not invent the model, perfected it. So what did the World Cup actually leave behind? Start with what is physically still standing. Almost nothing new. The stadiums existed already. The trophy went home with Spain. The revenue went to Zurich. The bills stayed in 11 American cities. What is still open? The ticket revenue audit, the city reconciliations, the federal remainder, and 2 state investigations into how those tickets were sold. Every one of those answers arrives quietly, months from now, in documents nobody live streams. That is where mega-event stories actually end. The confetti is gone, the bill arrived, and the biggest World Cup ever staged handed its host cities a subtraction problem. If you missed the first half of this money trail, watch our $13 billion World Cup investigation. Every dollar traced from the start. And if this earned it, subscribe. We follow the money behind the biggest stories on Earth, verified, labeled, and dated. Every week. Every source in this film is dated on screen and linked below. Read them. Check us. That's the point. This is the viral feed.